tending to go more north and go to Canada when they were colonizing. In the case of Australia, the Scots and the Celtic descendants were tended to go more south. But remembering about the northern and southern halves of the globe, we must remember then it's mostly the same. The Scots are going to more cold areas. So, but the result is that that Australia is very more or less started as a very homogeneous group by people who were basically English criminals and the people who guarded them and then wanted to secure the peace and so on. And it started all in the 1780s when the British Crown and the British government of George III, they have come up with the idea of sending criminals to Australia, and it was a desert-like, sandy, very distant region, which is compared by Niall Ferguson, the Scottish historian, to as some sort of 18th century equivalent of the planet Mars, that it was so distant and so on. In the early 19th century, they have the Australians, the new Australian elite, which were descendants mostly of the guardians of these soldiers, which were protecting the peace from the criminals. And they have decided that this human element is a little bit hard to transform into some more productive society, although in many cases it succeeded, but not always. So they asked the British Crown not to send anymore. In the 1820s, they asked not to send any more criminals. But the stereotypes about this starting the nation from criminals and policemen is mostly true. But it changed very radically during the 19th century. About the Aborigines. Aborigines, they don't even have their own name. Aborigines, that only means that the people who were originally there. For instance, we can say New Zealand Aborigines, but we usually use their own name Maori. And they are Maori people, and they have succeeded much more in the Western, the West-dominated culture. For instance, one of the most celebrated opera singers in the entire world is Kiri Te Kanawa, who is from Maori culture of New Zealand. And whereas the Aborigines of Australia, they don't even have their own name, and they were starting from a very low position in the evolution of human societies, and that prevented them to succeeding in the New Australian Anglo-Saxon dominated by the Anglo-Saxon culture. So there are many stories about them drinking gasoline and so on, and they are to some extent true. They are ruining their bodies because they don't really believe in the possibility of sustain their own culture, so they don't want really to live. They are like Russian after the fall of communism. They don't believe in nothing and they want to destroy themselves. So they can sometimes drink gasoline and do some other stupid stuff. So this stereotype is also to some extent true. When it comes about urbanizing, the Australian, as I mentioned before, is one of the most urbanized places on Earth, and far more than Western Europe, which is far bigger percentage, especially in France, but even in England, a very huge percentage of all the people are living in the small towns. In Australia, it's nothing like that. The huge majority, like 80%, is living in a big or very big towns. Cities, and there's almost no village culture to some greater extent. So this is really a huge difference, and this can we also see, for instance, in Thailand and some cultures like that, when you have a huge municipalities like Bangkok and so on. But we must remember that Australia is a big Australia is a modern, very rich, industrialized place, whereas in Southeast Asia and in South Asia we have many examples of urbanization without industrialization. Okay.